Which motherboard features do you actually need? And which ones are just marketing? Can a cheap motherboard bottleneck your entire system? And how do you pick the right board without overpaying? Socket compatibility. Choosing a motherboard starts with the socket. Sockets are physically incompatible across different generations, and even the same i7 label can refer to completely different sockets depending on the generation. Longevity is the real factor here. Some platforms, like AMD's AM4 or AM5, last through multiple upgrade cycles, while others are dead ends. That's the difference between a simple CPU swap in 2 years or being forced to tear out the entire board just to get a slightly faster chip. Chipsets and logic. The chipset controls how many devices you can connect and how data moves around the board. In the Intel world, H-series boards are office basics, B-series is the sweet spot for almost everyone, and Z-series is for those demanding maximum lanes and manual tuning. AMD follows a similar logic with A, B, and X series. For the average gamer, the gap between a mid-range B chipset and a flagship X or Z board has almost vanished. Unless you need to hook up 5 NVMe drives or 3 capture cards, a modern B650 or B760 offers effectively the same gaming performance as their more expensive siblings. The chipset doesn't directly increase performance. It mainly adds connectivity and lanes for data to flow. Most users never saturate the bandwidth provided by a mid-range chipset, making the flagship tier a luxury rather than a necessity. Form factors. Size doesn't dictate speed, but it dictates your life for the next 3 years of maintenance. ATX is the standard, offering the most room for cooling and expansion. mATX is often the cheapest because it uses less material, yet it retains enough features for the vast majority of users. Mini ITX is a specialized, expensive path. Interesting fact. High-end ITX boards can sometimes overclock memory better than ATX boards because the shorter distance between the CPU and RAM slots results in cleaner electrical signals. The trade-off is higher prices and a brutal building experience where every millimeter of cable management matters. The VRM. Shiny heatsinks often mask the most important part of the board. The VRM is essentially a power plant that takes 12 volts from your PSU and steps it down to roughly 1.2 volts for the CPU. If you're running a flagship like a Core Ultra i9, the cheapest board without proper VRM cooling is going to struggle under load. For high-end chips, look for a well-cooled VRM with a solid phase design, not just a high phase count on paper. A weak or poorly cooled VRM can lead to overheating, forcing your fans to ramp up while the system throttles CPU performance to keep temperatures under control. If you're not running a power-hungry chip, you can scale this back, but ignoring VRM cooling is still a bad idea. Memory slots and topology. 4 RAM slots look more professional than 2, but aesthetics hide a performance trap. Most mainstream boards use daisy chain topology, which is optimized for signal integrity when only 2 slots are occupied. Populating all 4 slots increases the electrical strain on the CPU's memory controller, often forcing the RAM to run at lower, stable frequencies. For a gaming build, 32 GB across 2 sticks is the technical golden zone. You only need 4 slots if you truly anticipate needing 128 GB of RAM for 8K video editing or heavy virtualization. DDR4 is starting to feel like legacy at this point. If you're building a new system, it makes more sense to go with a DDR5 platform. For most people, around 6,000 megathreads per second is the sweet spot in terms of value, at least at current memory prices. Luckily, I grabbed my 32 GB DDR5 kit a few months before prices spiked. Myth correction. Adding more RAM doesn't speed up your PC if your current capacity isn't full. 64 GB won't give you a single extra frame over 16 GB if the game only uses 12 GB. If you want a deep dive on RAM, I've got a dedicated video that clears up the confusion. PCIe slots and lane sharing. The top PCIe slot is the VIP lounge, usually wired directly to the CPU for the lowest possible latency. Lower slots are where things get deceptive. They might physically look like full X16 slots, but they are often electrically wired for only 4 lanes and routed through the chipset. This makes them significantly slower for anything other than basic expansion cards. In an era where GPUs take up 3 or 4 slots, these lower connectors are often blocked or starved for airflow anyway. PCIe 4 is still more than enough for modern GPUs. You'll hear about PCIe 5 and even 6, but for graphics cards, that's mostly future-proofing. The real benefit of newer PCIe versions shows up in storage, like NVMe SSDs, not in gaming performance. Unless you're running a specialized high-end workstation card, the generation won't change your gaming FPS. With modern GPUs pushing close to 2 kilograms, prioritize a reinforced, armored top slot. If your board doesn't have one, or even if it does, pick up a cheap GPU anti-sag bracket. I'll link one below so you know what to look for, to prevent that heavy card from cracking the slot over time. M2 storage and SATA. M2 has largely replaced traditional drive cabling. A mid-range board usually offers 2 or 3 of these slots. A critical detail involves lane sharing. The primary slot typically supports the fastest speeds, while secondary slots may disable SATA ports or, on some boards, share bandwidth with other devices. While Gen 5 drives are the new spec king, they run incredibly hot. A heatsink for your primary NVMe drive isn't just for show. It prevents the drive from slowing down to a crawl during large file transfers. As for SATA, you only need a high port count if you're building a massive media server with old-school hard drives. Audio and networking realities. Onboard audio is a favorite target for marketing adjectives like premium and studio grade. In reality, these chips sit inside a case full of electrical noise from the GPU and power supply. Even with fancy Japanese capacitors, an entry-level external DAC will almost always sound better. For networking, 2.5 gigabit Ethernet is the new standard, but it's useless unless your router and internet plan actually support those speeds. Wi-Fi is worth it if you actually use wireless networking. The built-in Bluetooth is a nice bonus, which simplifies connecting controllers or wireless peripherals without a clunky dongle. Fan headers and RGB control. A board with only 2 fan headers is a trap. You'll end up buying splitters or hubs, adding clutter to your build. Aim for at least 4 or 5 headers placed near the edges of the board to keep cables hidden. Regarding lighting, the 5-volt ARGB header is the modern standard. Avoid boards that only offer the old 12-volt RGB headers. They are functionally obsolete and won't allow the complex color effects found on modern fans and strips. The rear I/O panel. You will run out of USB ports faster than you think. Between a keyboard, mouse, mic, webcam, and external drive, a board with only 4 ports becomes a headache within a week. Look for a healthy mix of USB 3.2 Gen 2 and Type-C. USB 4 is a bonus on higher-end boards. Everything is backward compatible, but your speed will always be capped by your slowest device. HDMI and DisplayPort on the board are only for integrated graphics. If you have a dedicated GPU, you'll never use them. Thunderbolt is a high-speed niche for professional creators, but usually adds a significant premium to the price. More importantly, look for a BIOS flashback button. Newer sockets often need BIOS updates to support the latest CPUs, and without this button, you're stuck if you don't have an older chip to boot with. This allows you to update the board's firmware using just a USB stick, no CPU or RAM required. This is a lifesaver if you buy a motherboard that was manufactured before your specific CPU was released. The BIOS interface. The hardware is only half the story. The BIOS is where you'll set your fan curves, enable XMP or Expo for your RAM, and manage power limits. Major manufacturers have moved to high-resolution, mouse-driven interfaces, but some budget brands still use menus that feel like they're from 1995. A clunky BIOS can make a simple task like adjusting fan noise a nightmare. Also, keep an eye on the CMOS battery. If your PC starts forgetting the time or your BIOS settings after being unplugged, this $2 battery is the culprit, not a failing motherboard. The final trade-off. The difference between a $150 board and a $500 board rarely comes down to speed. You are paying for nice-to-haves, postcode displays that tell you exactly why a PC won't boot, dedicated clear CMOS buttons on the back panel, 10 USB ports instead of 5, and enough metal shielding to survive a drop. Different brands specialize in different features, but we'll tackle brand-specific pros and cons in another video. If you're building a tool to get a job done or play games, find a solid B-series board with a decent heatsink on the VRM and the ports you need today. Anything beyond that is often paying for features you may never actually use. What motherboard are you running right now? And what would you upgrade to if you had to pick today? Drop a like if this helped and subscribe for more clear hardware guides.